The Oaksville Library was a haven for lovers of knowledge, an imposing stone building with Gothic windows and bookshelves that stretched to the ceiling. During the day, it was a place of tranquility where university students and curious people from the city gathered to research, study, and read. However, at night, when the shadows swallowed the dusty shelves and the whispers of books came to life, the atmosphere in the library changed drastically. Julia, a young university student, had a deep fascination with the macabre and the unknown. While her classmates read novels and dramas, she delved into horror stories and urban legends. The Oaksville Library became her personal sanctuary, where she spent hours on end devouring books and researching scary stories. It was a stormy night, the wind howling outside and the rain beating on the library windows. Julia was engrossed in a dusty book she had found hidden on a forgotten shelf. The title of the book was The Collection of Lost Horrors, a name that intrigues her. She opened the book and began reading stories that she had never encountered anywhere else. The narratives were engaging, vividly written, and filled with chilling details. She felt like she was being drawn into the pages, lost in the horror stories. Hours passed without her noticing. The storm outside seemed to have no end, and Julia was completely immersed in reading. The candles in the library were almost burning to the end, dimly illuminating the pages of the book. One story in particular caught his attention. It was an account of an ancient ritual, a ritual that supposedly opened portals to other worlds. Julia read it avidly, believing it was just a legend made up to scare people. However, as the narrative unfolded, something made her stop and reflect. The ritual described was complex, involving black candles, ancient symbols, and the invocation of a being known as the Guardian of the Portals. The story warned about the dangers of the ritual, the terrible consequences that could befall those who dared to carry it out. But Julia was skeptical. She believed that the supernatural was nothing more than stories invented to entertain or scare. However, something about that story intrigued her. She found herself rereading the words, trying to understand what appealed to her so much. It was as if the narrative was pulling at her, as if there was a hidden truth in the words. Finally, when she finished reading, Julia made an impulsive decision. She decided to investigate the ritual, not because she believed it was real, but simply to prove to herself that it was a meaningless invention. The storm outside continued to rage, and Julia found herself alone in the library, the hallways empty and the atmosphere increasingly tense. She got up, leaving the book open on the table, and began looking for more information about the ritual in other books and records in the library. As she leafed through dusty pages and old documents, she found evidence that the ritual had been attempted by others in times past. However, reports were vague and often contradictory, as if those who attempted it were afraid to share all the details. Julia also found an engraving of a silver medallion, identical to what the book described as part of the ritual. The medallion was engraved with ancient symbols and looked sinister. As she watched him, a shiver ran down her spine, and she felt watched. The feeling that something was wrong invaded her, but her curiosity impelled her to continue. She decided she would try the ritual, not because she believed it would work, but to unravel the mystery behind it. There was no way for her to know what awaited her, and her decision would take her on a journey into the unknown, a journey that would change her life in ways she could never have imagined. As the night progressed, Julia was determined to investigate the ritual she had found in the mysterious book. She was skeptical about its effectiveness, but curiosity consumed her. The storm outside continued to rage, echoing the doubts that lingered in his mind. Julia set up a small makeshift altar in a secluded room in the library. Black candles, which she had obtained from an occult supply store, burned in antique silver holders. The floor was covered in symbols drawn in white chalk, imitating what I'd read in the book. The ritual described was complex. Julia needed to recite words in an ancient language, light the candles in the correct order, and hold the silver medallion tightly. It all seemed absurd, but she was determined to move forward. The library was silent except for the crackling of candles and the distant sound of the storm. Julia felt the tension rise as she began to recite the ancient words. They sounded strange on his lips, and the room seemed to grow darker. As the ritual progressed, she felt a strange presence around her. A shiver ran down his spine, and a feeling of oppression hung in the air. She continued, determined to move forward. When the candles were almost burning to the end, Julia spoke the last words of the ritual. At this moment, the silver medallion in his hand began to vibrate and emit a sharp sound. She felt a chill run through her body, as if an electric current had struck her. And then, it happened. In the middle of the room, a dense darkness began to form. It seemed to contort and take shape, as if something was emerging from the void. Julia watched with wide eyes as a tall, dark, hooded figure materialized before her. The being seemed faceless, a shadow that rose menacingly. Julia felt a wave of fear course through her body. She had created a supernatural presence in that room, and now she didn't know how to control it. The hooded being, which the book had called the Guardian of the Portals, looked at Julia with invisible eyes. She felt mesmerized by his presence, not knowing what to do next. "Who dares to disturb my rest?" The Guardian's voice echoed in the room, cold as the wind of a winter night. Julia stuttered, trying to find words to explain herself, but fear paralyzed her. The being in front of him wasn't just a fabrication of stories. It was real, and it was there because of his ritual. The gatekeeper then explained to Julia that the ritual she had performed was real, and portals to other worlds existed. However, the passage from one world to another had a price, and that price was a human soul. Julia finally understood the gravity of her action. She had summoned a dark entity and, to make matters worse, she was in a situation where she would be the offering. Fear gripped her, and she felt the shadows in the room tighten around her like an icy claw. The gatekeeper extended a spectral hand toward him, awaiting payment. Julia knew she had no choice but to try to undo what she had done. She tried to blow out the candles and erase the symbols on the floor, but the Guardian laughed, his chilling laugh echoing through the room. It was too late to undo what had been done. Darkness grew around him, and the gatekeeper was about to claim his due. Julia ran to the exit, but the room door closed in front of her, locking her in the room with the dark entity. What would happen next? Julia was about to face a terrible reality. The price of forbidden knowledge was higher than she had ever imagined. Julia was locked in the room with the Guardian of the Portals, a dark entity that she herself had summoned. The feeling of oppression was overwhelming, and fear consumed her. She was at a crossroads, not knowing how to deal with the situation she had created. The gatekeeper slowly approached, his hooded figure emitting an aura of darkness. His footsteps were silent, but Julia could feel his presence intensifying with each passing moment. She knew she couldn't escape, and the entity seemed to be aware of this. "You have unleashed what cannot be undone, young one," the Guardian spoke again, his voice echoing in the enclosed space. "A portal has been opened, and the price must be paid." Julia looked at the entity, determined to find a solution to the desperate situation she found herself in. "Is there any way to undo what I did? Any way to fix this?" The gatekeeper seemed to consider the question for a moment. "What has been done cannot be undone in the way you imagine. However, there is a choice to be made. You can pay the price that has been set, or find another way to satisfy the debt." Julia swallowed hard, trying to understand the Guardian's cryptic words. "What do you mean by another way to satisfy the debt?" The hooded being did not respond immediately. Instead, he moved closer to Julia, making her step back until her back touched the cold wall of the room. The Guardian's presence was overwhelming, and Julia could feel his terrifying power. "You are young, curious, and brave," said the Guardian. "There is an alternative to debt that you could consider. You could become the gatekeeper, responsible for maintaining the balance between the world. But this is not a choice that should be made lightly. The price is high, and the responsibilities are vast." Julia looked into the Guardian's invisible eyes, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what he was proposing. Being the Guardian of the Portal would mean sacrificing her own life, giving up everything she knew, and becoming a part of the supernatural. However, the alternative was to pay the price with his soul, an even darker and unknown fate. The choice was agonizing, but Julia knew she had to make a decision. "I don't want to lose my soul," Julia murmured, her voice shaky. "I accept the alternative. I will be the Guardian of the Portal." The Guardian nodded, as if expecting that answer. He reached his spectral hand toward Julia's chest, and she felt a sensation of warmth and power envelop her. It was as if a part of the Guardian's own essence had merged with her. The transition was quick, and when Julia looked at herself, She realized that she was now dressed in the same dark cloak as the Guardian. She had become the Guardian of the Portal, bound by a responsibility that transcended time and mortality. The gatekeeper smiled, although his invisible face made it difficult to discern his emotions. Your choice was brave, young Guardian. Now, your mission is to maintain the balance between the worlds, ensuring that no evil escapes the portal. Julia nodded, her resolve stronger than ever. She was ready to face the responsibilities she had accepted. However, one last question burned in his mind. How can I ensure that other people don't make the same mistake I did? The Guardian responded wisely. Knowledge is a powerful tool, and with power comes responsibility. You must ensure that forbidden secrets remain hidden. Your journey as a Guardian has just begun, and you will have much to learn. With a gesture of his hooded hand, the gatekeeper opened the door to the room, allowing Julia to leave. She left the dark room behind, her mind filled with new responsibilities and a deep understanding that the price of forbidden knowledge was higher than anyone could imagine. Now, Julia had become the Guardian of the Portal, a protector of the secrets that linked her to the supernatural. She was willing to do her duty, not only for her own redemption, but to ensure that others would not make the same mistake as she did. His life had changed irrevocably, and his journey into the world of the unknown had just begun. Julia, now the portal's guardian, had accepted a responsibility that would transcend her own life. She knew her role was to protect the balance between the worlds, ensuring that the portal she herself had triggered remained sealed. Her life had changed irrevocably, and the darkness of that night in the library followed her like a shadow. The following days were a whirlwind of learning and preparation. The gatekeeper instructed her on the tasks she would have to perform, the forbidden knowledge she would need to keep secret, and the volatile nature of the portal. Julia was determined to fulfill her mission, not only for her own redemption, but also to ensure that others would not make the same mistake as she did. However, being the guardian of the portal was not an easy task. Julia soon realized that the forbidden knowledge and horror stories she had explored had attracted other curious people, people who, like her, sought answers and experiences beyond the known world. Some were willing to perform dangerous rituals, defying the unknown, and Julia was determined to stop them. She began patrolling the library at night, when the atmosphere of the library changed and the whispers of books seemed to come to life. Julia knew the darkness was treacherous, and she couldn't allow others to make the same mistakes she did. One dark night, Julia heard whispering voices coming from a corner of the library. She approached cautiously, her dark cloak surrounding her like a shield. What she found shocked her. A group of university students were performing a ritual similar to what she had done. They had black candles, ancient symbols, and the same silver locket that Julia had worn. Julia knew she had to intervene. She approached the group, her face hidden by her hood, and spoke in an authoritative voice. "Stop immediately. You don't know what you're doing." The students, surprised and frightened, looked at the mysterious guardian of the portal. Some tried to resist, believing that a ritual would work, but the energy emanating from Julia was overwhelming. She explained to them the terrible truth she had discovered, the consequences of their actions, and the price they would have to pay if they continued. At first, the students were reluctant to believe, but Julia's words were full of conviction and experience. Finally, the students decided to undo the ritual, extinguishing the candles and erasing the symbols from the floor. They looked at Julia with gratitude and fear, knowing they had escaped a terrible fate. Julia warned them that forbidden knowledge was a dark force that should not be underestimated. She implored them to learn from their mistakes and never venture into the paths of the unknown as she had done. As time passed, Julia continued her mission as gatekeeper, protecting the Oaksville library from all who sought forbidden knowledge. She faced challenges and dangers, learning to control the portal and deal with the supernatural entities that lurked in the shadows. As the years passed, Julia realized that her life was destined to be one of eternal vigilance. She had accepted the price of forbidden knowledge and was willing to pay with her very existence. The Oaksville Library remained a place of tranquility during the day, but at night, when the shadows lengthened and the whispers of books seemed to come to life, Julia stood as the gatekeeper, a lone sentinel of the supernatural. She knew her journey would never end, and that her mission was to protect the world from the unknown, ensuring that forbidden secrets remained hidden. And so, The story of the gatekeeper in the Oaksville library became a legend, a tale of courage and redemption, and a warning to all who dared defy forbidden knowledge. The price of knowledge was high, and Julia was willing to pay him to protect the world from what lurked in the shadows.